from a strategic point of view and what you're hearing tonight, and how you might care to engage or not engage in this issue. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Hall.
Wonderful to see you coming out on this cold winter's night, a real Edmonton winter night, and I'm looking forward to hearing what our featured presenter this evening, Dr. James Beck, will have to say. Entitling the presentation, Medicine or Poison, Fluoridation and Future of Edmonton. And if prophecy is going to come into it, I'd like to prophesize that we should do this fairly expeditiously, getting the fluoride out of our public drinking water. This shouldn't take 10 years. This shouldn't take thousands and thousands of hours of mobilization. Our political leaders owe us better than that. This is 2013. It's not the 1940s. There's a lot of new science here that has to be taken into account. So many of you here in Edmonton probably share my sense of frustration with the glossy advertising and political posturing from the fluoride promoters. I had actually written down pushers, but I'll be polite this evening and call them promoters. In the Dental Association, the Alberta Dental Association, the Alberta Health Services, and many other bastions of the fluoride lobby throughout North America. What I find particularly galling is the feigned blindness of the fluoridation promoters to the masses of evidence, to the vibrant initiatives, and if we can go to the Whoop Up Days parade. This is us in the Whoop Up Days parade at Lethbridge this last August. The vibrant initiatives in public education and the growing mobilization of popular will marshaled to characterize, condemn, and stop a practice that is seriously undermining public health. The spectacle of healthcare providers simply pretending that there's no real need to acknowledge, let alone reckon seriously with the assertions of the defluoridationists, including our featured presenter here tonight, rightfully diminishes the confidence of significant sectors of the thinking public in the professional trustworthiness of some medical practitioners. This loss of confidence extends far beyond the fluoridation question, suggesting that key components of the public health apparatus are dangerously captive to the agendas of power brokers whose first allegiances lie elsewhere than the public interest and the common good. In recent months, I observed close up the fluoride pushers' unwillingness to address in open public debate the actual science advanced by their opponents, advanced by us. In mid-October, during the final week of the Lethbridge municipal election, I attempted to host such an open public debate, bringing together professional colleagues with opposing points of view on the fluoridation of our public water supplies. Of course, I felt incredibly honored when Professor Beck and Dr. Robert Dixon agreed to make the Calgary-Lethbridge-Calgary drive in order to grace the event, Fluoride in Our Tap Water, Medicine or Toxin. I'm happy to report that the assembly, which I believe was something of a model for this one, went really well. A room full of perhaps 200 people from many backgrounds made their way to the Lethbridge venue to hear and see the learned commentaries of the presenters. The most disappointing part of the initiative was the fact that Dr. Gary Fong, who is a Lethbridge resident, president of the Alberta Dental Association and College, declined my request that he take part or appoint a delegate to represent the pro-fluoride side in the Lethbridge Public Forum. I was really disappointed that he didn't respond to our invitation. While the chief spokesman for the dental profession in Alberta failed to even respond to my invitation, let alone attend the fluoridation forum, Dr. Fong did refer in to his non-participation in response to questions put to him by a reporter for the student newspaper at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Fong indicated he would not be drawn into public discussion on the fluoride issue at election time. We're there for the health of people, not the politics, claimed Dr. Fong. Rather than deal honestly and directly with the substance of contentions that the addition of hydrofluosilicic acid to communal water supplies is not safe, effective, or ethical, Dr. Fong resorted to the authoritarian assertion that all the government agencies support it. He emphasized particularly the sanction for the practice from Health Canada. Anyone who's observed the pattern of discourse between critics and proponents of fluoridation will easily recognize the meme. Rather than address the specific evidence brought forward by critics such as Dr. Beck and his co-author, Dr. Paul Canet, what the public gets most frequently from the pro-fluoridationists are reassurances that their side of the contention commands the lion's share of professional, institutional, and governmental sanction. This kind of high-stakes name-dropping is no substitute for specific responses to the details of the mounting evidence demonstrating that forced fluoridation significantly undermines public health without even offering significant protection against tooth decay. There's something quite derelict, unscholarly, and even malfeasant about the failure of our supposed custodians of public health to meet on its own terms the scientific work brought forward by the likes of Dr. Beck and the other expert critics of the state's forced fluoridation of our water supplies. We saw this evidence-averse approach deployed in the recent municipal election when name-dropping letters were published in the Lethbridge Herald emanating from, for instance, the Canadian Dental Hygienists Association and something called the Canadian Association of Public Health Dentistry, and this is the president of that organization, Dr. Jerry Uswek, who's also dean of the medical school in Saskatoon. These interventions were followed by more direct representations from officials of the Alberta Ministry of Health, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. James Talbot. On behalf of the provincial government, Dr. Talbot called upon all candidates for mayor and for membership in City Council to continue the fluoridation of Lethbridge tap water. This surprised me during an election that an official from the government of Alberta would intervene in the election, bringing the resources and the influence of the provincial government to favor, if we can go to the picture of the pro-fluoridationist candidate, Chris Spearman, and he's there posing with a vessel called Lethbridge tap water. He's running and campaigning on the idea that he's for the water, fluoridated water as it is now. He has the provincial government officials come in during the election and take his side. That surprised me. That is inappropriate intervention of the political government in the municipal election process. Given the nature of these heavy-handed interventions by the fluoride lobby, of which the Alberta Dental Association and College forms an integral part, Dr. Fong's claim does not ring true that the important professional organization he represents is somehow above politics. Indeed, the governance of the dental profession is shot through with various forms of politics, including the cynical politics of promoting fluoridation. The corrupt nature of this politicization reflects the onslaught of similar sorts of malfeasance reflected, for instance, in the downplaying by the Alberta Health Services of the increased rates of cancer affecting especially Aboriginal hunting and fishing communities downstream from the tar sands. Similarly, Dr. Fong's highlighting of Health Canada's pro-fluoridation stance serves as a reminder of the notorious subjugation of that agency to corporate dominance, as reflected in the plight of Dr. Shiv Chopra and Margaret Hayden, whose whistleblowers who were fired for their effort to protect Canadians from threats to public health, such as the use of bovine growth hormone. As I learned from a paper sent to me by Dr. Beck, outlining the circumstances of about 24 specific cases, the history of the fluoridation debate is replete with many examples of agenda-driven, not science-driven attacks on the professional standing of scientists who have pointed to the negative health effects emanating from artificial fluoridation of public water supplies. One of the most high-profile cases of professional persecution took place in the early 1990s with the firing of Dr. William Marcus, toxicologist of the Office of Drinking Water for the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. Dr. Marcus came to the conclusion from tests he had conducted on rats that the fluoridation of public water causes higher rates of cancer. The scientist famously described fluoride as a poison whose negative health effects are compounded by the toxic chemicals leaching of lead from water pipes. The judiciary later ordered the reinstatement of Dr. Marcus. His fluoridation studies stand with many hundreds of other studies that provide copious proofs that the fluoridation of public water supplies undermines public health. What happens to hydrofluosilicic acid when it passes into our public water infrastructures and then into our digestive tracts? In this process, many fluorine ions disassociate from their host elements. Because these ions are so unstable, they tend to recombine with the chemical elements of our organs, but especially our kidneys, thyroids, neurological systems, bones, and veins. The effects of fluoridation, which are steadily incremental throughout the entire span of our lifetimes, the fluoridation is so unstable, the fluoride ions, they glam on to our internal structures, and we don't eliminate the fluoride in our urine. About half of it stays in us and collects over a lifetime. The effects of fluoridation are incremental. They tend to fall most harshly on those already afflicted with kidney disease. Thyroid seems to be a major area of effect and such. Young children, pregnant mothers, and elderly face disproportionately higher rates of negative health effects. The proof is mounting that these negative effects extend to higher rates of cancer, heart disease, and lower IQs in children who come of age in fluoridated areas. Think of that. If there's any possibility even that children are having lower IQs as a result of fluoride, what kind of approach is it that says, well, unless you can prove that conclusively, absolutely, we're just going to continue to do it? How did this flip take place, where it's somehow incumbent upon the critics to prove it doesn't cause effects? Aren't we supposed to have a public health system that says we err on the side of caution? If there's evidence it might cause effects, that's enough not to do it. The pineal gland, which is recognized in some Eastern religions as a seat of higher light and higher spiritual, a seat of inner light and higher spiritual consciousness, is especially subject to fluoride toxification. Think of our pineal glands being calcified, toxified. One very common marker of the pervasive impact of fluoridation is the high incidence of dental fluorosis that is manifest in discolored and sometimes mottled teeth. When these effects show up in plain sight on the sole external feature of our skeletons, our teeth, we can legitimately ask what is happening in those parts of our bone structure that we can't see. As both a PhD in biophysics and a medical doctor, Dr. James Beck has developed a broad overview of the full range of scientific literature touching on all these topics. He's drawn on the fruits of a long and successful career, leading him from St. Louis to Berkeley to Minneapolis and Calgary. In 1969, Dr. Beck became a founding member of the medical faculty. Why don't you just go back one into the cities that have defluoridated? His specialty is medical biophysics. Dr. Beck continues as a professor emeritus of the medical faculty he helped found. One of his former students, Dr. Robert Dixon, drew Professor Beck into the field of fluoridation studies. This collaboration formed a strategic part of the genesis of the anti-fluoridation movement, culminating in the historic decision of the Calgary City Council in 2011 to defluoridate the community's municipal water supply. The decision of Calgarians to join with most of Europe, British Columbia, and Quebec. In fact, about 95% of the world is not drinking fluoridated water, at least artificially fluoridated water. So it's concentrated in North America. This is a minority utilization of our water infrastructure in North America. The decision of Calgarians to join with most of Europe, British Columbia, and Quebec in banishing hydrofluosilicic acid from tap water. It's part of a larger Canadian trend that includes, for instance, Windsor, Aurelia, Thunder Bay, Waterloo, Moncton, Okotoks, Tabor, and Athabasca, and soon Edmonton, I expect. Dr. Beck has worked closely with the top echelon of experts who have assumed leadership roles on the cutting edge of the municipal defluoridation movement. Dr. Beck teamed up with toxicologist Dr. Paul Conant and with biologist Dr. H. Spedding Micklem to co-author the Case Against Fluoride, How Hazardous Waste Ended Up in Our Drinking Water, and the Bad Science and Powerful Politics That Keep It There. What a great subtitle. Talk about going for the jugular with the subtitle. In my view, this text offers a model of effective scholarship directed at serving the public interest and the common good. It provides an historical chronology as well as an in-depth synthesis of the work of both the fluoridation promoters and their critics in terms that make the debate accessible to a wide readership. To me, the volume presents a model of engaged investigation whose effect is to open up the possibility of a more democratized handling of an issue, one that helps illustrate the growing crisis permeating many branches of our healthcare systems, together with their attending regulatory systems. In my opinion, Dr. Beck is serving the North American public, but especially the Canadian public, with high academic distinction. And we thank you very much for that, Dr. Beck. Through his contribution to assemblies such as this one, Dr. Beck is helping citizens develop understanding of the information and scientific method necessary for constructive involvement in debates is fundamental to our collective and individual well-being, as those concerning the safety of our food, water, and air. The appearance of the indispensable, the Case Against Fluoride, is part of the necessary process of opening up the fluoridation debate to a variety of healthcare professionals and academic researchers who are not dentists and are not captives of the fluoride lobby. As Christopher Bryson has compellingly demonstrated with his text, The Fluoride Deception, the fluoride lobby developed as an outgrowth, especially of the nuclear weapons lobby. What a story. The aluminum lobby, the refrigerator lobby, Freon used fluoride a lot, and the sugar lobby. You can imagine how it was something of a gift to the sugar lobby that they can continue to saturate children's foods with sugar and claim that they had an antidote for it. After the Second World War, the leading operatives of all these businesses joined with the professional organization of North American dentists and doctors to miraculously transform a notorious industrial pollutant into a medicine for children's teeth. One of the key architects of this transformation was Edward Bernays, the inventor of the term public relations, and a key spin doctor charged to sell Americans many things, including the U.S. government's national security agenda in the Cold War. Some of you may be moved to take the time to look more into how the national security agenda came to include the fluoridation of public water supplies in North America, an outmoded and dangerous process that many of us want to terminate as quickly as possible. Our featured presenter tonight is an expert on many aspects of a topic leading communities primarily in Canada, the United States, Australia, and Ireland towards a long overdue reckoning with the fluoride deception. It's a great honor and pleasure, therefore, to present this historic gathering in Edmonton with tonight's featured presenter, Dr. James Beck. Thank you.
Reject starting fluoridation. We'd like to continue that success because it's wrong. And but before I go on, I want to give you two disclaimers. I had no financial or material interest in fluoridation. And in fact, the book I co-authored with Paul Kahn and Steady Mifflin provides royalties, but I don't, those royalties, my portion of those royalties that are donated to Fluoride Action Network are used to support the work I do in traveling to testify before town and city councils and so on. The other disclaimer is I have a medical degree, but I don't practice medicine, and I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I left clinical medicine in 1957 and to study biophysics, and my career since then has been as a researcher, teacher in basic sciences. So those are my two disclaimers. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm just telling you what I see in terms of evidence and what conclusions I've come to. So what I'd like to do, and I'll try to do this in about half an hour so we have time for questions. So if I say anything suspicious that you want to challenge, keep it in mind for when I stop. And right now, this first slide is just, well, partly to keep me on track and also to tell you what's coming. What's coming is these three questions about fluoridation of public water supplies. And the first one, not in order of importance, the middle one is the most important, but the questions are, is it effective as a preventive of cavities, or dental caries? The second question is it safe for human consumption? And the third, is it ethical to fluoridate the city's water supply? The first two questions are scientific questions. And we have to appreciate the problem that is thrust on our city and town councilors, because for the most part, they aren't scientists, and they aren't dentists or physicians. Being a dentist and a physician doesn't help a great deal in evaluating scientific primary research. But they're not prepared to make a decision like this, even if it were legal and even if it were ethical for them to do so. So we have to understand and sympathize with them, because they're under tremendous pressure here. Pressure from both sides, and the officials of provincial and city health departments come to them and say, well, fluoridation is safe and effective, and it's wonderful. And we have people like me coming in off the street saying they're wrong. And so what we have to do is give them reasons that they can understand. They may not understand the difference between a covalent bond and an ionic bond, but they can understand that there is research that has shown us this and this and this. Now, the proponents of fluoridation don't have much to show. And they don't bother too much to do, to try. But I have too much to show. I'm not going to do this in depth. There's enough time. Each one of these topics, well, for the first two, they should take 4 or 5 hours each. Well, I'll spare you that. And but in addition, I would like to bring this all into one arena by considering the question of water fluoridation in the context of the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is often oversimplified by just saying, oh, if in doubt, don't. But actually, it's a system that gives us a framework for evaluating questions about whether a procedure or a drug should be administered or not. That's just because it... Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I talked too long already. Do what now?
Oh, it's good for you now.
Okay, and I use this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on the first question of efficacy, its effectiveness, well, this is not a systematic scientific study I'm showing you. There are very few systematic studies of whether fluoridation is effective in preventing cavities. I'll say more of that in a moment or two. But this is a lot of data, and it's data that was gathered by the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization is a promoter of fluoridation, wrongly, but at least it tells you what their inclination would be. But they did honestly give us some of this data, which was then put together by Chris Norak, and to give this graph. What it shows you is that there was experience of 18 nations of the industrialized world with their experience of dental cavities. The DMFT over here means decayed, missing, and filled teeth. That's considered by pro and anti fluoridation is to be a reasonable measure of the prevalence of cavities. So the prevalence of cavities, you can see, has gone down in 18 of these countries. Now the difference, say, between here and here is not very much. You know, it's 3 or 4 cavities, and this is in children. But what's interesting about this set of data is that 14 of those countries were not fluoridated. 4 were, and the 4 are mixed up in here. They're not separated. So that suggests it's true that what the promoters say, that since we started fluoridation in the 1960s, the incidence of cavities has gone down in the industrialized world. Hooray! But not because of fluoridation. This data goes from the early 1960s to 2004. And those countries, you know, they all have the same experience, whether they were fluoridated or not. Now, so what we have to rely on, you know, are epidemiological type studies. You look at a population and compare one that's fluoridated with one that's not fluoridated, and look at their experience with cavities, and decide whether there's a difference, and hopefully what that difference is due to. Now, it's very difficult to do because there are a lot of other factors that influence the incidence of cavities, like diet, like whether you brush your teeth, like whether you fluoridated toothpaste, whether you have enough vitamin D in your diet, and so on. And it's very difficult to get populations that are comparable on all those other factors, except for the one getting fluoridated water and one isn't. But given that difficulty, it's hard to evaluate. Some of these early studies, they were started in 1945. There were 4 such studies, and initiated. One of them was delayed, but they were supposed to go for 10 years. 2 of them were in the United States, one in Canada and one in New Zealand. The one in New Zealand was shown to be fraudulent. They made up the data to show that it was effective. The one in Canada was between 2 cities with not well balanced for confounding variables. That's what I was talking about. It said they should match in every way except for fluoridation. Like the diet is a confounding variable. And but the studies didn't show that it was effective. They're often cited as being effective, as showing an efficacy. But that's not the case when you look at the data. That, by the way, if some of you are really eager to go in depth into this and start reading the scientific papers, read the primary research. Primary research is what's done by asking a question, presenting a problem, gathering the data, analyzing the data, and coming to a conclusion. The other kind of things that we cite often are reviews of primary studies, and that's a different thing. Other things that we hear about are endorsements fluoridation say, oh, there are 93 organizations that, professional organizations that endorse fluoridation. Well, they are all professional organizations. Most of them are trade organizations, not scientific societies. And their net number is decreasing. They don't tell us about that either. So, I suppose I shouldn't make those ancillary remarks, but, you know, once upon a time I was an angry young man. I think I've shared some of that anger with Dr. Hall. Well, now I'm not an angry young man. I'm an angry old man. Because the world hasn't changed much. So these early studies, I think, can be totally discounted. They said their design was really bad, and I can go into that in detail if someone wants to challenge me on it. And the other thing, I mentioned reviews. The reviews must, oh, by the way, I was going to say, reading the primary research in the fluoridation area anyway, I have, over and over, I've read papers where the abstract indicates that fluoridation is effective. But you look and the conclusions say fluoridation is effective. But the data says it's not effective. Now, I think some of those researchers could defend themselves for doing this because they would recognize that they can't get funded to do research if they come up with the wrong answers. So maybe they're protecting themselves in that way. But I think the health of hundreds of millions of people on this planet is more important than that protection. So on the reviews, there aren't very many good reviews. A review that's well done gathers all the papers that have been done on the subject and looks and sees which ones are worthwhile considering. And then takes those worthwhile ones and analyzes them. And to do that is a big job. And there aren't very many good reviews. The two reviews that have received some credibility or been judged to be credible are the York Review, and it's published in 2000, which was on both efficacy and safety. It was done by an institute within the York University in Great Britain by people whose academic careers were in such evaluations. And they concluded that there's not sufficient evidence to show that fluoridation is effective. And there's not sufficient evidence to show that it's safe. And there is no evidence to show that it's good for children of low-income families, which is one of the appealing reasons that we're often given. However, the promoters of fluoridation have cited the York Review over and over and over as saying that fluoridation is safe and effective. And I've had the experience of correcting a dental officer of health of Alberta Health Services who's done that 3 times in my presence while we were both testifying before town and city councils. And I said that's not true. And I sent him a report written by Professor Trevor Sheldon of York University, who supervised the work of that panel, who was so frustrated because for years after this was published in 2000, promoters kept saying that it showed it was safe and effective. So he wrote a press release saying you should stop doing that because it's not true. And they continued. In that one case, it was someone who's I hope he read it. I sent it to him and I told him what. Anyway, the last item here, the other good review is a review done by the National Research Council of the United States. It had to do mostly with toxicity. It took them 3.5 years, 12 scientists, and with the help of dozens of others. And ended up with 507 pages, citing about 1,100 references. And they concluded that in some cases that fluoridation is apparently toxic. in others it possibly is. And by others, I mean in various effects on various body systems. But I won't go into this. It's more time. And now, this last item is to point out that essentially the only reliable way we have of deciding whether a drug is effective or a procedure is effective is through a randomized controlled trial. And randomized means that the subjects are selected to receive the treatment or not receive the treatment randomly. And also it should be double-blinded, so neither the person who makes the measurement, the observation, nor the subject knows whether they got the placebo or the medicine. There is no such trial, not one, on fluoridation. And it's not that it's impossible. It's not even hard. But it's never been done. One would expect the countries that promote fluoridation would be eager to do that. But that's where the least work on fluoridation is done, especially on the toxicity of fluoride. Now, let me, I bet I've used up one more time already, haven't I?
You're okay.
Okay, here is a list of body systems where there are harms that are known to be associated with fluoride in the water, or possibly associated with fluoridation in the water. Now, it's kind of mystifying at first to think, well, maybe Beck's crazy. How can one little thing cause so much harm in so many different systems? Well, there's good reason. You would expect it to cause harm in all these systems because the thing that fluoride ion does when it's in the body is inhibit the action of enzymes, of some, maybe not all enzymes, but thousands of enzymes. It's been used in laboratory studies specifically to inhibit, deactivate enzymes. Enzymes are essential. They govern the reaction, chemical reactions in the body, which all our organs and tissues depend on to function. The other reason is that it affects what we call a signaling system across the membranes of cells. Membranes of cells are largely fatty material, so if you have a water-soluble hormone in the blood, say, it can't get information inside the cell to tell it to stop doing something or start doing something because it can't pass through the fatty membrane. But so what has developed through evolution is a system of proteins embedded in the membrane that carry that signal across. And we know that fluoride blocks that signaling. So, and that signaling applies to the functions in all tissues and organs as well. So, that's why this shouldn't surprise us. I will show you more about this first one on the teeth, but bone is, we have studies that aren't very certain, but some are pretty strongly indicative of an effect of fluoride in the drinking water on bones, particularly hip fracture. And as Dr. Hall mentioned, hip fracture is a big problem in the elderly. And about half of the elderly who have hip fracture never again have independent living. And many of them die within 6 months. So it's a serious problem. And it is found that in several of the better studies, that it's associated with fluoridated water. The fracture increases, incidence increases as the concentration increases in the water. And so that's one thing that is fairly certain. The thyroid system is clearly certain because we have the epidemiological studies that show suppressed thyroid function in the presence of fluoridation compared to thyroid function in populations not experiencing fluoridated water. But in addition to that, we had evidence of what we would call plausibility evidence, because we know with great precision what fluoride ion does to the thyroid system. It affects the thyroid hormones. There are more than one. It affects their distribution and balance, as well as affecting directly the thyroid gland. So that's a pretty certain thing, and it is particularly risky for people without adequate iodide in their diet. And a low or inadequate iodide content in the diet is not at all uncommon in Canada or the United States. So it's a major problem for us. Now, the reproductive system, well, Dr. Hall mentioned something about the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin plays a role in regulating sexual development. And even in these faulty studies, early ones that I mentioned I was criticizing, they made observations on things other than the condition of the teeth. And one of them showed that the onset of menstruation in girls was earlier in the fluoridated populations than in the non-fluoridated populations. It also affects sperm number and quality in men. I was 2 seconds too late.
If I would have known we had to use my computer,
Okay.
or change the settings before.
I'll try to be hurried.
It just needs love every once in a while.
Okay, then. Now what's that? Now here's something where about that first tissue I was talking about, the teeth. You see here at the top, the blue bars are fluorosis. That's dental fluorosis. Dental fluorosis is this change in the teeth. I'll show you. Dr. Hall showed you a slide. I'll show you another in a moment. And it shows that the dental fluorosis increases as the concentration of fluoride in the water increases. And that is, this one, at least the Kumar here is a proponent of fluoridation, but he gave us this great evidence against his position. But at the same time, I'll show you that the caries experience here, that is, the percent of children having caries with related to the concentration shows no difference as the concentration changes. So here's a picture of mild fluorosis, moderate fluorosis, severe fluorosis. I just want to say that those terms are technical terms used in diagnosis of dental fluorosis. So they don't have their street meaning. You know, mild fluorosis is something you think maybe we can ignore. And the promoters want us to ignore it too. They put it down and say, oh, it's not important, it's just a cosmetic effect. Failing to consider what that has to do with their psychological state and social experiences of children who won't smile or won't go out with their friends because their teeth look like that. That's a fairly common condition. These are not so common, but they're very serious. And so to show you what it's like, we don't have very much data on this in Canada. Health Canada is not very interested in fluoridation except to protect it and from criticism. But this is data from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States, which is also a promoter of fluoridation. But they have this data, and this data comes from all these age groups in the United States, whether they have fluoridated water or not. Now, the degree of fluoridation in the United States is somewhere around 65%, between that and 70% of the population is using fluoridated water. But they're losing cities. The fluoridators are losing cities there too. And you see that overall it's about 30% of the people have dental fluorosis. But look at the 12 to 15-year-olds. 41% have dental fluorosis. Most of that is mild, which is, I think, is not something you can ignore. But even if you want to ignore it, some of it's not mild, and it leads to the loss of teeth and bad health. Now, so this is just to go back to repeat this because I wanted to say something more about these, but I don't want to do that now. Let me make a comment or two about the ethical question. I think this is what moved me to start looking at fluoridation. When I first thought about it, I was just outraged. I was appalled that somebody sitting in an office somewhere can force someone to drink fluoride for their whole lives without their consent and without knowing whether it's hurting them. In medical ethics, you can't, by the way, fluoride is a medicine, and hydrofluosilicic acid is a medicine according to court decision and according to common sense. Because fluoride is not a nutrient, you see. It's not necessary for human health. So if you give something that's not a nutrient, or that is artificial, hydrofluosilicic acid doesn't occur in nature. It only occurs in industrial processes. If you give a substance like that, it's for the purpose of preventing or treating a disease, then of course it's a medicine. Even the Supreme Court of Canada said that in 1957. And so I think it's appropriate to apply the ideas of medical ethics to this question. So the informed consent means that you have to have a professional, qualified professional who talks to you about it, tells you the reasons they want you to take the medicine, tells you what the possible side effects are, says we're going to monitor its effects on you, that you can stop it anytime you want. None of those things occur to fluoridation of the public water supply. None of them. So it's an outrage on medical ethics. And you don't have to be a technician or a scientist or a dentist or a physician to understand that argument. Everybody can make that judgment. Well, so I guess I'm way over, but the proprietary principle now, what it does is put forward several questions that have to be answered in the process of deciding whether to administer a procedure or a medication to an individual or to a population. So the first question is, what is the expected benefit? Well, in the case of water fluoridation, the people who advocate fluoridation expect it to prevent cavities. Well, I don't think they can show that that's a very certain conclusion to come to. But even if they could, to what extent does it prevent cavities? Well, Dr. Hardy Lineback, who's a practicing dentist and recently retired from the dental faculty in the University of Toronto, where he was the head of the Department of Preventive Dentistry and was at one time the president of the Canadian Dental Research Organization, says that in a lifetime you might save 1 or 2 cavities. Now, why do you save those 1 or 2 cavities? Apparently, it's not because you swallowed fluoride. It's because you somehow, maybe by use of fluoridated toothpaste or by going to the dentist for treatment, had fluoride applied to the enamel of your teeth. Because there, it does interact with the enamel. And if you have questions about that, we can go into the chemistry, but I think it's not necessary. It does apparently prevent cavities due to topical effect. And that is, but it's a small effect. And it may explain that 1 or 2 cavities you save a person throughout their life. So what is the expected benefit? Well, if at all, very small. So is there evidence of harm? Well, I've talked about that. There's plenty of evidence of possible harm, and some evidence of darn sure harm. Are harms reversible? Some of them are, but some of them aren't, and some of the serious ones are not. That's a big question, you see, because if you discover harms having decided using the precautionary principle is worth doing, and it turns out that you can't get rid of the harm that you cause. You know, some harms you might cause, you can recover from a lot of things. Then the fourth question I have is, are there risks in stopping? Well, we're often told by promoters that if you stop, there will be a terrible and sudden increase in all your children's teeth will fall out. But that's never happened. That's never happened. Not long ago, two dentists in Calgary, who were very much in favor of fluoridation, said, oh, in our practice we're seeing much more dental cavities and much worse cavities. And I say, well, that may be true. I'm not going to call them liars. I don't see their patients. But we do know that they are biased observers. But they are observing the patients in one dental practice for each dentist. And they say, all the children of Calgary are suffering because the council stopped fluoridating. But they had no justification for that. As you saw in that 18 country plot, I have tens of millions of cases to look at. Not the cases of one or two private practicing dentists. So there are several studies, a number of studies, I should say many, that some done in Canada, specifically to ask this question, what happens if you stop? And the answer is either nothing happens when you compare it to the study where it wasn't stopped, they're the same after stopping in the one, or the one where it was stopped had fewer cavities than the one where it wasn't stopped. So there are no risks in stopping. Now, and this last question is very interesting. Are there alternatives? Whether there's benefit or not from fluoridating the water, is there some other way to prevent cavities? Well, we're pretty sure that putting enough, we're probably through with this. Well, there's one more. Okay. We're pretty sure, what was I talking about?
Alternatives.
Oh, yeah. Okay. A good diet is an alternative. We're pretty sure that a good diet, especially a good diet with respect to vitamin D, is an alternative to any other way of preventing cavities. We're pretty sure that brushing with fluoridating toothpaste works too. It seems to work from a topical effect. By the way, the Centers for Disease Control, the American Dental Association, the Environmental Protection Agency, I think even the Canadian Dental Association all say, oh, since 1999 they say, oh, it's effective by topical effect, not by swallowing it. And then they keep more and more. They want to put more fluoride in more water, even though they say that's not what's helping. Now you explain that to me. And well, I have some possible explanations, but they're nasty. And another alternative is good dental care. You know, and poor children in the United States whose families are on Medicaid are not treated by most dentists because the fees Medicaid provides aren't good enough. So probably one of the best ways to prevent cavities is to prevent poverty. Because if you prevent poverty, you have better dental care, better education, and better diet. And, well, It also gives you news about fluoridation, where it stopped, where it started, and so on. Then this slweb.org, that's the website of an outfit called Second Look. And they also have a very good bibliography, and their bibliography is organized in terms of what you're asking about. What, for example, there would be a group on the thyroid system, a group on the brain, a group on the bone, and all these papers would be there. Not papers that are all good for people arguing against fluoridation, and not all good for people who are arguing for fluoridation, but they're research papers, and they can be evaluated.